The head of the world's only Jewish state stands in the well of America's house and warns our president isn't doing enough to confront the nuclear ambitions of a, quote, dark and murderous regime. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made history today, becoming only the second foreign leader to deliver his third address to a joint meeting of the U.S. Congress. Winston Churchill was the first. And the Israeli Prime Minister today seized the occasion to issue a dire warning about the fate of the Jewish people, the stability of the Middle East, and the perils of American diplomacy that he sees as dangerously out of touch with reality. For his part, President Obama said he didn't bother to watch, but that he read the transcript and saw nothing new. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Ed Henry's at the White House. He has the president's dismissive reaction and the political fallout from the prime minister's historic speech. But we begin with Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen on a forceful and passionate plea from an ally who feels abandoned by the White House. Good evening, James.
Bret, good evening. Invoking the specter of the Holocaust and warning that the world again stands at a fateful crossroads, Prime Minister Netanyahu urged the Congress to in effect bypass President Obama and assert greater control over the nuclear negotiations with Iran. In grim, often gripping fashion, the Israeli Prime Minister warned that the U.S. and 5 other countries negotiating with Iran are preparing to leave the Islamic regime's vast nuclear infrastructure intact, including 5,600 centrifuges enriching uranium.
It's a very bad deal. We're better off without it.
Worse still, Netanyahu said the deal would only last 10 years or so, after which Iran's remaining 15,000 centrifuges could be reactivated.
Now, I want you to think about that. The foremost sponsor of global terrorism could be weeks away from having enough enriched uranium for an entire arsenal of nuclear weapons, and this with full international legitimacy.
Several dozen Democrats and all members of the Obama administration boycotted the session, but Netanyahu still played to a packed House chamber and a global audience. He portrayed Iran as a formidable regional power, already potent in Gaza, Baghdad, Beirut, Damascus, and Sana'a. And he warned that Shiite Iran will never partner with the U.S. to defeat the Sunni terrorists of ISIS. Rather, Netanyahu cast the mullahs of the Islamic regime and the marauders of the Islamic State as kindred spirits, pointedly using the very terminology President Obama eschews.
Iran and ISIS are competing for the crown of militant Islam. So when it comes to Iran and ISIS, the enemy of your enemy is your enemy.
In remarks to the pro-Israel lobby group AIPAC Monday night, White House National Security Advisor Susan Rice pre-butted Netanyahu's address by arguing that negotiators cannot realistically insist that Iran dismantle its entire enrichment apparatus.
The plain fact is, no one can make Iran unlearn the scientific and nuclear expertise it already possesses.
A special arms control advisor to Secretary of State Clinton, Robert Einhorn, was a member of the U.S. delegation to the nuclear talks with Iran.
I still think it's possible to have a good deal, one that permits a very limited enrichment capacity.
The nuclear negotiators are working to finalize a deal with Iran by March 24th. By then, the results of the Israeli elections, in which Prime Minister Netanyahu is standing for re-election, will be 1 week old. Bret.
James, thank you. Many Democratic lawmakers boycotted the Netanyahu speech. Some also excoriated Republicans for arranging it. But it was President Obama who had the most to say about it. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry has that part of the story tonight.
For someone who said he did not bother to watch the speech, President Obama had an awful lot to say, offering an 11-minute rebuttal to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
I did have a chance to take a look at the transcript, and as far as I can tell, there was nothing new.
Beyond the transcript, it appears the president also read some talking points from his longtime political advisor, David Axelrod, who sent a series of tweets that mirrored the president's criticism, declaring, quote, "Speech broke no new ground, nor offered realistic path short of war, not a plan. Eager for Bibi to make the turn and share his plan for preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon." The president, who scheduled a teleconference with European leaders about Ukraine during Netanyahu's speech, picked up Axelrod's theme in comments later.
The prime minister didn't offer any viable alternatives.
Interesting, since the president will not tell the American people details about the deal Secretary of State John Kerry is negotiating in Geneva.
We don't know your plan.
This is what's clear, as the president has a very clear strategy that he has laid out.
The president and his aides pushed back on Netanyahu, even though he started his speech with praise.
Some of what the president has done for Israel might never be known because it touches on some of the most sensitive and strategic issues that arise between an American president and an Israeli prime minister.
Though Netanyahu's pointed criticism of the president's talks with Iran left House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi claiming she nearly cried throughout the speech because she was insulted.
I was near tears because I love Israel very much.
Democrats who skipped the speech piled on the prime minister for demanding a better deal with Iran.
He's like the child who says, I want to go to Disneyland every day, eat ice cream and drink Coca-Cola every day, and not go to school.
While a senior Democrat took the opposite approach, issuing a warning to the president last night at AIPAC.
I am not intimidated by anyone, not Israel's political enemies, and not my political friends when I believe they're wrong.
Bob Menendez suggesting there he's ready to help pass a bill that would make sure this deal would have to get approved by Congress and can't get pushed through by executive order. Also suggesting Democrats may join Republicans in pushing more sanctions over the president's objections. Brett?
Ed Henry live on the North Lawn. Ed, thanks. More on this with the panel. Iraqi troops and Shiite militias are battling ISIS terrorists south of the Iraqi city of Tikrit. ISIS is defending that city, which it captured last year, through the use of roadside bombs and suicide attacks. Local officials say Iraqi forces, along with Iranian Quds forces, made little headway today. Yes, Iranian forces assisting to retake Saddam Hussein's hometown from ISIS. Venezuela has given the U.S. 2 weeks to cut its diplomatic mission in Caracas by almost 80%. Venezuela's foreign minister says the U.S. delegation must match the Venezuelan contingent in the U.S. at 17. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says his country will retaliate after the detention of several people he says are spies for the U.S. Another potentially major scandal tonight for Hillary Clinton. It involves private emails, national security, regulations and laws about government transparency, but it also deals with presidential politics. Correspondent Doug McKelway has the story.
Presumptive presidential candidate Hillary Clinton used her private email account exclusively for all her emails while she was Secretary of State. That finding, uncovered by the House Select Committee on Benghazi, may constitute a violation of the Federal Records Act. It leaves the committee guessing about what may be missing.
The fact is, the State Department cannot certify they have produced all of former Secretary Clinton's emails because they do not have all of former Secretary Clinton's emails, nor do they control access to them.
Gowdy's claim is at odds with the State Department's view.
The notion that the department didn't have the content of these emails until she turned them over isn't accurate. A vast majority of them were to or from state.gov addresses or to addressees, so they were obviously retained and captured in that moment.
A spokesman for Mrs. Clinton added that because she emailed State Department aides at their own state.gov accounts, she had, quote, every expectation they would be retained. But the New York Times noted Clinton's spokesman declined to answer questions about emails she may have sent to foreign leaders, people in the private sector, or government officials outside the State Department. That omission looms large given unanswered questions about Benghazi and donations to the Clinton Foundation during her tenure, later renamed the Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation after she left office.
I think this was a mistake, and I think they're going to be digging out from underneath this for a long time.
GOP hopefuls who may face her in a 2016 presidential race were quick to pounce.
There's a pattern here of non-transparency, I guess, is the real concern for most people.
Jeb Bush tweeted, quote, transparency matters. Unclassified Hillary Clinton emails should be released. In 2007, the House Oversight Committee investigated the George W. Bush administration for its wide use of emails using a Republican National Committee account. The Bush administration maintained it was designed to avoid violations of the Hatch Act, which forbids political activity by government employees. Clinton confidant John Podesta said at the time, quote, at the end of the day, it looks like they were trying to avoid the Records Act.
If the Select Benghazi Committee subpoenas the emails, Clinton may have forfeited her right to executive privilege because she used that personal email account. We reached out to several cabinet secretaries today to ask if any uses personal email accounts for official correspondence. None who replied to us, and many did, said yes. The Department of Interior's answer was typical of them. Quote, the Secretary does not use a personal email account when conducting official business, nor has she. Brett?
Doug, thank you. The career of a man once mentioned as a possible presidential candidate is in further ruins tonight. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Harrods has the latest development in the downfall of retired General David Petraeus.
Newly filed court documents say David Petraeus, one of the nation's most highly decorated generals and a former CIA director, lied to FBI agents and unlawfully stored as well as shared classified information with his biographer and mistress, Paula Broadwell. Under the deal, the retired general will plead guilty to a misdemeanor and do 2 years probation and pay a $40,000 fine.
The president believes that it was appropriate for General Petraeus to take responsibility for his actions.
The plea agreement says Petraeus documented his military career using several black notebooks containing classified and unclassified material. Petraeus now admits it was wrong to share the notebooks with Broadwell. The plea deal sheds new light on the fall of 2012 as the Benghazi terrorist attack unfolded, and Petraeus faced accusations he misled lawmakers by pushing the administration's false explanation and internet video was to blame. At CIA headquarters, 2 weeks before he was forced to resign, Petraeus told FBI agents he'd never shared classified material with Broadwell. Quote, these statements were false. The acts taken by defendant were in all respects knowing and deliberate and were not committed by mistake, accident, or other innocent reason.
It remains to be seen whether this is just a sad chapter or a sad ending to the story of David Petraeus. I think going forward, his credibility inevitably has to be undercut, but I think it's an open question as to just how damaging something like this is.
A source close to Petraeus told Fox tonight he's relieved the deal's in place, with his supporters complaining the allegations against the retired general seem severe, given Broadwell also had a clearance and national security was never compromised. Brett?
Catherine, thank you. Retired neurosurgeon Ben Carson has created an exploratory committee to run for president. That makes him the first GOP candidate to formally enter the 2016 race. On the Democratic side, former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley says he will not run for the Senate seat being vacated by retiring Barbara Mikulski. Many people expect O'Malley to challenge Hillary Clinton for the Democratic presidential nomination. Up next, common sense or capitulation? House leaders call off their squeeze play on the Obama executive actions on immigration. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 25 in Boston, where a jury has been seated for the trial of Boston Marathon bombing suspect Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. Opening statements are given tomorrow. Tsarnaev could get the death penalty for the bombings that left 3 people dead and more than 260 injured. Fox 50 in Raleigh, North Carolina, with the search for millions of dollars worth of gold after 2 security guards were found on Interstate 95 with their hands tied behind their backs. Authorities say the guards report being robbed of 3 barrels of gold by men in a white van. And this is a live look at Los Angeles from our affiliate out there, Fox 11. Big story there tonight. A girls' high school basketball team has been kicked out of the playoffs for a uniform violation. The girls from Narbonne High wore pink lettering for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. The coach and players say they were unaware they needed prior approval to wear a color other than their school colors. That's one to follow. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.